Sarah Chun had always been fascinated by things that could explode. As a child growing up in a small Ohio town, she would take apart old radios and clocks, trying to understand how they worked. Her parents thought it was just a phase, but Sarah's curiosity about mechanical devices never faded. By the time she turned 18, she knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. The local community college offered a program in electrical engineering, and Sarah threw herself into her studies. She was one of only 3 women in her class of 35 students. The other students often questioned whether she belonged there, but Sarah's professors quickly recognized her natural talent for understanding complex systems. She could look at a circuit diagram and immediately spot problems that others missed. During her second year, a guest speaker came to talk about explosive ordnance disposal. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez had spent 15 years defusing bombs in various war zones around the world. He spoke about the precision required, the split-second decisions, and the lives that hung in the balance with every wire that was cut. Sarah sat in the front row, completely captivated by every word. After the presentation, Sarah approached the lieutenant colonel. She asked him about the training, about what it took to become an EOD specialist, and whether civilians could work in the field. Rodriguez looked at her with a mixture of surprise and respect. Most people who asked him about his job were either trying to impress someone or were simply curious. But he could see something different in Sarah's eyes, a genuine passion for the technical challenges involved. Rodriguez explained that explosive ordnance disposal was primarily a military field. Civilians occasionally worked as contractors, but they usually had extensive military backgrounds first. The training was intense, the work was dangerous, and the military culture wasn't always welcoming to outsiders, especially women. He didn't try to discourage her, but he was honest about the challenges she would face. Sarah left that presentation with her mind made up. She would find a way to work in explosive ordnance disposal, military or not. She began researching everything she could about bombs, detonation systems, and defusal techniques. She studied chemistry to understand different types of explosives. She learned about electronics to understand timing mechanisms. She even took courses in psychology to understand the minds of people who made bombs. Her professors were initially concerned about her intense interest in explosives, but they soon realized that Sarah's approach was purely academic and technical. She wasn't interested in making bombs. She wanted to understand them so thoroughly that she could take them apart safely. Her final project in her engineering program was a detailed analysis of how different detonation systems could be safely neutralized. After graduating with honors, Sarah applied for every job she could find that was even remotely related to explosive ordnance disposal. Most companies turned her down immediately when they saw she had no military experience. Others were more polite, but ultimately said the same thing. They needed people with battlefield experience, not just classroom knowledge. Sarah refused to give up. She took a job with a security company that specialized in airport screening equipment. It wasn't bomb disposal, but it gave her experience with detection systems and security protocols. She worked there for 2 years, learning everything she could and building a reputation for her technical skills and attention to detail. During this time, Sarah continued her education on her own. She attended every conference on security and explosive detection that she could afford. She read technical manuals and military publications. She even built relationships with retired EOD specialists who were willing to share their knowledge with someone so dedicated to learning. One of these retired specialists was Sergeant First Class James Murphy, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before losing his left leg to an IED. Murphy had been struggling with civilian life when he met Sarah at a security conference. Her enthusiasm and genuine respect for his experience gave him a new sense of purpose. He began meeting with Sarah regularly, teaching her practical skills that couldn't be learned from books. Murphy taught Sarah how to think like someone placing a bomb. He showed her how to recognize different types of improvised explosive devices and their typical weaknesses. Most importantly, he taught her to stay calm under pressure. They would practice with mock devices that Murphy built, simulating the stress and time pressure of real situations. Under Murphy's guidance, Sarah's skills improved dramatically. She learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether a device was real or fake, active or inactive. She practiced working with different tools and learned to make quick decisions based on incomplete information. Murphy was impressed by how quickly Sarah absorbed everything he taught her. After 2 years of unofficial training with Murphy, Sarah felt ready to try again for a position in explosive ordnance disposal. This time, she had practical experience to go with her theoretical knowledge. She applied to several private military contractors who worked with government agencies. The responses were mixed. Some companies were intrigued by her unusual background and dedication to the field. Others remained skeptical about hiring someone without formal military training. One company, Secure Tech Solutions, was willing to give her a chance, but only in a support role. They offered her a position as a technical analyst, reviewing bomb disposal reports and helping to improve equipment and procedures. Sarah took the job immediately. It wasn't the hands-on work she ultimately wanted, but it was a foot in the door. She would be working alongside active EOD specialists, learning from their experiences, and contributing her technical expertise to their operations. The pay was modest, but Sarah wasn't motivated by money. She wanted to be part of the team that kept people safe from explosive threats. Her first day at Secure Tech Solutions was both exciting and intimidating. The office was filled with former military personnel who had years of combat experience. Sarah was clearly the outsider, young, female, and civilian. Some of her new colleagues were welcoming, curious about her background, and impressed by her technical knowledge. Others were more skeptical, questioning whether someone without military experience could really understand the realities of bomb disposal. Sarah's supervisor was Captain, retired David Thompson, a former Navy EOD officer who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thompson had been initially reluctant to hire Sarah, but the company's technical director had convinced him to give her a chance. Thompson decided to test Sarah's knowledge and dedication before fully accepting her as part of the team. Thompson gave Sarah a series of increasingly complex case studies to analyze. These were real situations that EOD teams had faced in the field, with identifying details removed. Sarah's job was to review the reports and identify what had worked well and what could have been done differently. Thompson expected this would take Sarah several weeks to complete properly. Sarah surprised him by completing the analysis in 4 days. More importantly, her insights were remarkably astute. She identified patterns that experienced EOD specialists had missed and suggested improvements that could have saved time and reduced risk in several situations. Thompson realized that Sarah's civilian background was actually an advantage in some ways. She approached problems without the assumptions that came from military training. Impressed by Sarah's analytical skills, Thompson began including her in briefings for active operations. Sarah couldn't participate directly in bomb disposal missions, but she could provide technical support and analysis. She helped teams prepare for different scenarios and suggested equipment modifications that could improve safety and effectiveness. Sarah's reputation within the company grew quickly. Other teams began requesting her input on difficult cases. She developed a knack for spotting details that others overlooked and for thinking creatively about solutions to technical problems. Her colleagues began to forget that she was a civilian and started treating her as one of the team. 6 months into her job at Secure Tech Solutions, Sarah got her first opportunity to work directly with a military EOD unit. A suspicious package had been discovered at a government building in Washington, D.C. The local bomb squad had requested technical support from Secure Tech, and Thompson decided to bring Sarah along as an observer. The package was in the basement of the building, in a storage room that had been evacuated along with the entire building. The initial X-ray images showed what appeared to be a complex electronic device with multiple components. The local bomb squad had the expertise to handle most situations, but this device was more sophisticated than anything they had seen before. Sarah studied the X-ray images intently while the bomb squad team discussed their options. The device appeared to have multiple trigger mechanisms and what looked like a tamper detection system. The team was debating whether to try to disarm it in place or to attempt a controlled detonation. After several minutes of observation, Sarah noticed something that the others had missed. The positioning of one component suggested that the device might not be a bomb at all, but rather a training device or possibly even an elaborate fake. The electronics were real, but they were arranged in a way that wouldn't actually create an explosion. Sarah shared her observation with Thompson, who passed it along to the bomb squad commander. The team leader was initially skeptical of input from a civilian, but Sarah's analysis was detailed and technically sound. They decided to investigate further before proceeding with either disarmament or detonation. Using specialized equipment, the team was able to confirm that Sarah was correct. The device was indeed a fake, probably left behind by someone conducting training exercises. There were no actual explosives present, just electronic components arranged to look threatening on an X-ray. The building was cleared and operations returned to normal within hours rather than the days it might have taken if they had proceeded with a controlled detonation. The incident marked a turning point in how Sarah was perceived by the EOD community. Word spread about the civilian analyst who had correctly identified a fake bomb that had stumped experienced military personnel. Some still questioned whether she belonged in the field, but others began to recognize that her different perspective could be valuable. Thompson recommended Sarah for advanced training in explosive device analysis. The company sent her to a specialized course taught by federal agents who worked on domestic terrorism cases. The training covered both military ordnance and improvised devices used by criminals and terrorists. Sarah excelled in the program, finishing at the top of her class despite being one of the few participants without law enforcement or military experience. The advanced training opened new opportunities for Sarah within secure tech solutions. She began working on more complex cases and was occasionally called in to consult on active investigations. Her analytical skills and fresh perspective made her a valuable asset to teams that might otherwise overlook important details. Sarah's personal life during this period was largely consumed by her work. She had few friends outside of the EOD community, and her romantic relationships suffered because of her intense dedication to her career. Her parents worried that she was becoming too obsessed with dangerous work, but Sarah felt more fulfilled than she ever had before. She continued her informal training with Murphy, who had become both a mentor and a close friend. Murphy was proud of Sarah's progress and impressed by how far she had come from the eager college student he had first met. He began teaching her more advanced techniques and sharing stories from his military experience that helped her understand the psychological aspects of bomb disposal work. One evening, Murphy told Sarah about the most difficult mission he had ever faced. It was in Afghanistan, and his team had been called to disable a complex IED that was blocking a critical supply route. The bomb was more sophisticated than anything they had encountered before, with multiple failsafe systems and what appeared to be anti-tamper devices. Murphy had spent hours studying the device before attempting to disarm it. Every decision carried the risk of triggering an explosion that could kill him and his teammates. In the end, he had succeeded in disabling the bomb, but the experience had taught him that technical knowledge alone wasn't enough. The ability to stay calm under extreme pressure and make sound decisions with incomplete information was just as important as understanding how explosives worked. Sarah listened to Murphy's story with fascination and growing determination. She realized that she had learned a great deal about the technical aspects of bomb disposal, but she had never truly tested her ability to perform under the kind of pressure that Murphy described. She wondered if she would be able to stay calm and make the right decisions when lives were at stake. That question would be answered sooner than Sarah expected. Her reputation in the EOD community was growing, and she was about to face a challenge that would test everything she had learned and determine whether she truly belonged in this dangerous and demanding field. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was deep in sleep when her phone rang, the harsh sound cutting through her dreams. Thompson's voice was tense and urgent when she answered. There had been an incident at a military installation outside the city. A bomb had been discovered, and the situation was more complex than anyone had anticipated. Sarah dressed quickly and drove through empty streets to the secure tech offices. Thompson briefed her on what little information they had. The device had been found in an underground maintenance tunnel at Fort Harrison, a military base that housed both active personnel and civilian contractors. The base's EOD team had attempted to assess the bomb, but something had gone wrong during their initial investigation. The team leader, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, had been injured when a secondary device triggered while they were examining the main bomb. Rodriguez was alive, but had been rushed to the hospital with severe lacerations from shrapnel. Worse, the explosion had damaged the lighting system in the tunnel, leaving the remaining device in complete darkness. The base commander had immediately called for outside assistance. The bomb appeared to be more sophisticated than anything his remaining EOD personnel had encountered. It had multiple components, several potential trigger mechanisms, and what appeared to be motion sensors. The initial explosion suggested that whoever built the device had anticipated that bomb disposal experts would investigate it. Sarah felt her heart racing as Thompson explained the situation. This was exactly the kind of scenario she had trained for, but she had never imagined her first real test would come under such difficult circumstances. The military base was reluctant to accept help from a civilian contractor, but they were running out of options. Their most experienced EOD specialist was in the hospital, and the device was too dangerous for their remaining personnel to handle alone. Thompson made it clear that Sarah's role would be strictly advisory. She would not be allowed to approach the device directly. Military protocol prohibited civilians from handling live explosives, especially in an active military installation. Sarah would review the available data and provide technical analysis to help the military team make decisions about how to proceed. The drive to Fort Harrison took 45 minutes through pre-dawn darkness. Sarah used the time to review everything Thompson had told her about the device. The description reminded her of several case studies she had analyzed, but there were unique elements that suggested this was the work of someone with considerable technical expertise. At the base, Sarah was escorted through multiple security checkpoints. Her civilian status made the process more complicated, and several guards questioned why a non-military person was being allowed into a restricted area during an active bomb threat. Thompson's credentials as a former Navy officer helped smooth the way, but Sarah could feel the suspicion and skepticism of the military personnel they encountered. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, met them at the command post that had been established near the tunnel entrance. Hayes was a career military officer with 23 years of service. She had commanded units in combat zones and had dealt with explosive threats before, but the current situation was testing her experience and judgment. Hayes explained that the tunnel system ran beneath several critical buildings on the base. If the bomb detonated, it could damage the foundation of the communications center and potentially disrupt military operations across the region. More immediately, there were still personnel in the buildings above who hadn't been evacuated because moving them might trigger the motion sensors that appeared to be part of the device. Sarah studied the photographs and X-ray images that the EOD team had managed to capture before the secondary explosion. The device was indeed complex, with multiple electronic components arranged in a configuration she had never seen before. There were elements that looked familiar from her training, but they were combined in ways that suggested either very sophisticated knowledge or possibly the work of multiple bomb makers. The tunnel itself presented additional challenges. It was narrow, with concrete walls and ceiling that would intensify any explosion. The damaged lighting meant that anyone approaching the device would have to work by flashlight or portable illumination. The motion sensors appeared to be positioned to detect approach from multiple directions. Colonel Hayes made it clear that she was uncomfortable with the entire situation. The base's protocols didn't include provisions for civilian involvement in explosive ordnance disposal. She was allowing Sarah to provide analysis only because her remaining EOD personnel had recommended seeking outside expertise. Any actual work on the device would have to be done by military personnel. Sarah reviewed the available information for over an hour, looking for patterns and clues that might indicate how the device could be safely disabled. She identified several components that appeared to be key to the bomb's functioning, but she also noticed elements that didn't fit standard bomb-making patterns. Some of the wiring seemed unnecessarily complex, and there were components that appeared to serve no obvious purpose. The breakthrough came when Sarah noticed something in one of the X-ray images that the military analysts had dismissed as irrelevant. There was a small component near the center of the device that looked like it might be a master switch or control unit. If her analysis was correct, disabling that component might shut down the entire system without triggering any of the apparent failsafes. Sarah shared her observation with the military EOD team, led by Sergeant First Class Michael Chun, who had been called in from another base to replace the injured Rodriguez. Chun was experienced and competent, but he was also cautious. The device was unlike anything he had encountered in his 12 years of EOD work. Chen studied Sarah's analysis carefully. Her interpretation of the X-ray images made sense, but it was based on theoretical knowledge rather than practical experience. Chen had seen situations where seemingly logical approaches to bomb disposal had led to catastrophic failures. He was reluctant to risk his life and the safety of the base on the analysis of someone who had never actually defused a bomb. Hours passed as the team debated different approaches. Each option carried significant risks, and the pressure was mounting to make a decision. The base couldn't remain in its current state of partial evacuation indefinitely, and intelligence reports suggested that whoever had planted the device might have others planned for different locations. As the morning wore on, Sarah became increasingly frustrated with her limited role. She could see potential solutions to the problem, but she wasn't allowed to implement them. Her civilian status kept her relegated to an advisory position, while military personnel wrestled with decisions that she felt confident she could help resolve. The situation changed dramatically when new intelligence arrived about the bomb maker. Military intelligence had identified the likely creator of the device as a former military contractor named Robert Vance, who had been discharged from his position for psychological instability. Vance had extensive knowledge of both military ordnance and civilian explosive techniques, which explained the unusual combination of elements in the bomb. More importantly, the intelligence report included information about Vance's previous work. He had been involved in designing training devices for EOD personnel, which meant he understood exactly how bomb disposal experts would approach his device. The motion sensors and apparent tamper detection systems were specifically designed to exploit standard military EOD procedures. This information changed Sarah's analysis significantly. If Vance had designed the bomb to defeat military EOD techniques, then a non-standard approach might be more successful. Sarah's civilian background and unconventional training might actually be an advantage in dealing with a device designed to confuse military bomb disposal experts. Sarah presented her revised analysis to Colonel Hayes and Sergeant Chen. She believed that the device was designed to trigger if approached using standard military procedures, but it might be vulnerable to a different approach. The key was to avoid activating the motion sensors while accessing the central control component she had identified. Chen remained skeptical of Sarah's analysis, but Colonel Hayes was beginning to see the logic in her argument. If the bomb maker had specifically designed his device to defeat military EOD techniques, then perhaps they needed someone who didn't think like a military EOD expert. The debate was interrupted by new information from the hospital. Sergeant Rodriguez had regained consciousness and was able to provide more details about what had happened when he was injured. He confirmed that the secondary device had triggered when he followed standard protocol for examining suspicious objects. The bomb maker had indeed anticipated military procedures. Rodriguez also provided crucial information about the layout of the main device. His brief examination before the secondary explosion had revealed details that weren't visible in the X-ray images. There were additional components hidden beneath what appeared to be the main body of the bomb. Sarah's analysis of the central control unit might be correct, but accessing it would be more difficult than anyone had realized. Time was running out. Intelligence reports indicated that Vance might be planning additional attacks, and the base couldn't remain in its current state much longer. Colonel Hayes faced a decision that could determine whether the bomb was successfully disabled or whether it detonated with potentially catastrophic consequences. The pressure intensified when seismic monitors detected slight movement in the tunnel. The device's motion sensors were extremely sensitive, and even minor vibrations from foot traffic in the buildings above were registering on their detection systems. If someone walked too heavily in the wrong location, it might trigger an explosion. Sergeant Chen proposed a plan that involved using remote-operated equipment to approach the device without triggering the motion sensors. The plan was technically sound but would take several hours to implement and carried its own risks. If the remote equipment malfunctioned or if Vance had anticipated this approach, the results could be disastrous. Sarah had been thinking about the problem from a different angle. Her analysis suggested that the motion sensors might be designed to detect the specific approach patterns that military EOD personnel were trained to use. Someone approaching the device differently might be able to avoid triggering the sensors entirely. Colonel Hayes found herself considering an option she had never thought possible: allowing a civilian to attempt to defuse a live bomb on a military installation. Everything in her training and experience argued against such a decision. But the conventional approaches weren't working, and time was running out. Sarah could see that Colonel Hayes was wrestling with the decision. She knew that her next words might determine whether she would finally get the chance to prove herself in the field she had dedicated her life to preparing for. She also knew that one mistake could cost her life and potentially cause enormous damage to the military base and the people in it. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from base security. They had detected unauthorized movement near the perimeter fence closest to the tunnel system. It was possible that Vance or an associate was attempting to monitor the response to the bomb, or worse, planning to trigger additional devices while the base's attention was focused on the tunnel. Colonel Hayes now faced multiple threats simultaneously. She had a complex bomb in a critical location, potential additional threats around the base perimeter, and limited resources to address all of the problems. She needed solutions quickly, and conventional military approaches weren't providing them. Sarah realized that this was the moment she had been preparing for her entire career. Everything she had learned, from her engineering studies to her training with Murphy to her analysis work at Secure Tech, had led to this point. She was being asked to put her knowledge and skills to the ultimate test in circumstances more challenging than anything she had ever imagined. The decision Colonel Hayes made in the next few minutes would change Sarah's life forever and challenge everything the military believed about who was qualified to handle explosive ordnance disposal in life-or-death situations. Colonel Hayes stood in the command post staring at the tunnel entrance, her mind racing through options that all seemed impossible. The security alert about perimeter movement had added a new urgency to an already desperate situation. She had 37 years of military service, but nothing had prepared her for the decision she was about to make. Sarah watched the colonel's face, seeing the internal struggle playing out behind her disciplined expression. Military protocols existed for good reasons, and breaking them could end Hayes's career even if everything went perfectly. But Sarah could also see that Hayes was a leader who put mission success above personal safety. Sergeant Chun received an update from the hospital about Rodriguez's condition. The injured EOD specialist was stable, but would require surgery for internal injuries caused by the secondary explosion. More importantly, Rodriguez had remembered additional details about the device that changed everyone's understanding of what they were facing. The bomb wasn't just designed to defeat military EOD procedures. It was specifically designed to exploit the standard equipment and techniques used by military bomb disposal teams. Vance had included components that would trigger if they detected the electromagnetic signatures of standard military EOD tools. Using conventional equipment to approach the device would almost certainly result in detonation. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications. Vance hadn't just built a bomb. He had built a trap specifically designed to kill military EOD personnel. His knowledge of military procedures and equipment had allowed him to create something that turned standard safety protocols into triggers for destruction. Colonel Hayes received another update from base security. The movement near the perimeter had been identified as a news crew attempting to get footage of the evacuation. There was no immediate threat from outside the base, but the incident reminded everyone that word of the situation was spreading. They couldn't maintain operational security indefinitely. Thompson approached Colonel Hayes with a proposal that surprised everyone, including Sarah. He suggested that Sarah be allowed to attempt the bomb disposal, but with full military support and supervision. Her civilian status and non-standard training might be exactly what the situation required. Thompson emphasized that Sarah had more theoretical knowledge about explosive devices than most military EOD specialists, and her different approach might be the key to success. Sarah's heart pounded as she listened to Thompson make the case for letting her attempt something that no civilian had ever been authorized to do on a military installation. She felt a mixture of terror and excitement that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. This was what she had been preparing for, but the reality was more daunting than any scenario she had imagined. Colonel Hayes asked Sarah directly whether she believed she could successfully defuse the device. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. She explained that her analysis suggested an approach that might work, but she couldn't guarantee success. What she could promise was that her method would be different from anything Vance would have anticipated when designing his trap. The key to Sarah's approach was based on her understanding of Vance's psychology and technical background. He had designed the bomb to defeat military procedures, which meant he had thought like a military EOD specialist when creating his countermeasures. Sarah's civilian training had taught her different approaches that might not trigger the anti-tampering systems. Sergeant Chin remained opposed to allowing a civilian to attempt bomb disposal on his base. He argued that Sarah's lack of practical experience made her a liability, regardless of her theoretical knowledge. Chin had seen too many situations where academic understanding proved inadequate when lives were at stake. The debate was settled by an unexpected source. A secure communication came through from the Pentagon, where officials had been monitoring the situation. Military intelligence had confirmed that Vance was likely responsible for at least 3 other explosive devices at different locations. The current situation was part of a larger attack, and time was running out to prevent additional casualties. The Pentagon authorization was unprecedented. Sarah would be allowed to attempt the bomb disposal under military supervision, with full responsibility remaining with Colonel Hayes. If Sarah's approach failed, the base would proceed with a controlled detonation that would likely cause significant damage but would contain the explosion. Sarah was fitted with protective equipment and communication gear while the team prepared for her descent into the tunnel. The protective suit was heavier than she had expected, and the helmet restricted her vision more than she had anticipated during training. She had practiced working with similar equipment during her sessions with Murphy, but the reality of wearing it in a life-or-death situation was different. The tunnel entrance was located in a concrete structure behind the base communications building. Sarah could see the damaged lighting system that had been destroyed by the secondary explosion. The tunnel beyond the entrance disappeared into complete darkness, illuminated only by the portable lights that the EOD team had set up. Before entering the tunnel, Sarah reviewed her approach one final time with Sergeant Chun and the military EOD team. Her plan was to approach the device from an angle that should avoid triggering the motion sensors, using hand tools rather than electronic equipment that might be detected by the anti-tampering systems. She would attempt to access the central control component she had identified in the X-ray images. Sarah's communication system allowed the command team to hear everything she said and to provide guidance if needed. Multiple cameras were positioned to record her approach, both for safety purposes and for analysis in case something went wrong. Everyone understood that they were in uncharted territory. The descent into the tunnel was more difficult than Sarah had anticipated. The damaged lighting created deep shadows that made it hard to judge distances and obstacles. The protective suit made movement awkward, and the weight of her equipment affected her balance. She had to pause several times to steady herself and maintain her bearings. As Sarah moved deeper into the tunnel, she could hear her own breathing amplified by the communication system. The sound was distracting, but it also helped her monitor her stress level and maintain the calm focus that Murphy had taught her was essential for EOD work. She forced herself to breathe slowly and deeply, using the techniques she had learned from managing pressure. The tunnel turned twice before opening into the chamber where the bomb was located. Sarah's portable lights revealed a space about 12 feet square with concrete walls and a low ceiling. The device was positioned in the center of the chamber, exactly as shown in the photographs she had studied. Seeing the bomb in person was different from analyzing X-ray images and photographs. The device was larger than Sarah had expected, roughly the size of a briefcase, with multiple components connected by a complex web of wires. Several of the components were blinking with LED lights, indicating active electronic systems. Sarah spent several minutes studying the device from different angles without approaching it closely. She identified the motion sensors that Vance had positioned to detect approach from multiple directions. She also spotted several components that she hadn't seen in the photographs, including what appeared to be backup detonation systems. The central control component that Sarah had identified in her analysis was visible, but partially hidden beneath other parts of the device. Accessing it would require removing or disconnecting several other components first, each of which might be protected by anti-tampering systems. Sarah realized that her approach would need to be more complex than she had originally planned. Sarah's first challenge was positioning herself to work on the device without triggering the motion sensors. Based on her analysis of their placement and apparent sensitivity, she identified a narrow approach angle that might avoid detection. The positioning was awkward and would make it difficult to manipulate her tools, but it appeared to be the only safe option. Working with hand tools in the cramped space while wearing protective equipment proved more difficult than anything Sarah had practiced during training. Her movements had to be precise and deliberate, but the bulk of her protective suit made fine motor control challenging. She had to stop frequently to rest her arms and maintain steady hands. The first component Sarah attempted to disconnect was what appeared to be a secondary timer mechanism. According to her analysis, removing this component should disable one of the potential trigger systems without affecting the others. She used wire cutters designed specifically for EOD work, approaching the connections with extreme care. The wire cut cleanly, and nothing happened. Sarah felt a moment of relief, but she knew that the absence of an immediate reaction didn't necessarily mean success. Vance might have designed delayed responses into his system, and she still had several more critical components to address before the device would be truly safe. Sarah's next target was a component that appeared to be part of the motion detection system. Disabling it might allow her greater freedom of movement as she worked on the rest of the device. This component was more difficult to access, requiring Sarah to reach around other parts of the bomb while maintaining her careful positioning. As Sarah worked on the motion sensor, she noticed something that hadn't been visible in any of the previous analysis. There was a small LED display on one side of the device that showed a countdown timer. The display read 43 minutes and was counting down. Sarah immediately reported this discovery to the command team. The countdown timer changed everything. What had been a careful, methodical process now became a race against time. Sarah had to work faster while maintaining the precision necessary to avoid triggering any of the anti-tampering systems. The pressure was enormous, but Sarah forced herself to focus on the technical challenges rather than the consequences of failure. Colonel Hayes and the command team debated whether to abort Sarah's attempt and proceed with controlled detonation. 43 minutes might not be enough time for Sarah to complete her work, especially if she encountered unexpected complications. However, the controlled detonation would cause significant damage and might not even be possible to set up in the available time. Sarah requested permission to continue working. She believed she could disable the device if she could access the central control component, but reaching it would require removing several other parts first. Each step carried risk, and the countdown timer added pressure that made every decision more difficult. Working as quickly as she dared, Sarah began disconnecting components in the sequence she had planned during her analysis. Each cut wire or removed part brought her closer to the central control unit, but also increased the risk that she might trigger a fail-safe system. She had to trust her understanding of Vance's design and her analysis of how the different systems interconnected. With 28 minutes remaining on the countdown timer, Sarah reached the central control component. It was a small electronic unit about the size of a smartphone, connected to the rest of the device by multiple cables. Sarah's analysis suggested that this unit controlled the other systems, but she still had to determine how to disable it safely. The central control unit had 3 different types of connections: power cables, data cables, and what appeared to be fail-safe triggers. Sarah had to identify which connections could be safely severed and which ones might cause the device to detonate if disturbed. She studied the unit carefully, looking for clues about its internal operation. Sarah's training with Murphy had included lessons about reading the intentions of bomb makers through their technical choices. She tried to think like Vance, understanding how he would have designed the central control unit to protect against tampering. Her analysis suggested that the power connections might be safe to cut, but the fail-safe triggers were more dangerous. With 18 minutes remaining, Sarah began the delicate process of disconnecting the central control unit. She started with what appeared to be the primary power connection, a red cable that supplied electricity to the entire system. Cutting this cable should shut down the device, but it might also trigger backup systems that Vance had included as protection. Sarah positioned her wire cutters around the red cable and paused. Everything she had learned and trained for had led to this moment. Her decision would determine whether she successfully defused her first real bomb or whether her career in explosive ordnance disposal ended before it truly began. In the darkness of the tunnel, with the countdown timer showing 16 minutes, Sarah made her choice. Sarah's wire cutters closed around the red cable with a small clicking sound that seemed to echo through the tunnel despite her careful movements. For a moment, nothing happened. The LED lights on the device continued blinking. The countdown timer kept running, and Sarah held her breath waiting for either success or explosion. Then, one by one, the LED lights began going dark. The countdown timer flickered and went blank. The soft humming sound that Sarah hadn't even realized she was hearing stopped completely. The device was silent and dark, appearing completely inert for the first time since she had entered the tunnel. Sarah stayed motionless for several long seconds, afraid that any movement might trigger a delayed response. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it over the communication system. Finally, she reported to the command team that the device appeared to be deactivated, but she needed to verify that all systems were truly shut down before declaring it safe. Using a portable electronic scanner that wouldn't interfere with disabled systems, Sarah checked each component of the device. One by one, she confirmed that the electronic systems were inactive. The motion sensors showed no readings, the timing mechanisms were dead, and even the backup systems that Vance had included as failsafes had shut down when the central control unit lost power. Colonel Hayes authorized the base EOD team to enter the tunnel and assist with final verification and removal of the device. Sergeant Chun led the team down to Sarah's location, bringing additional equipment and expertise to ensure that the bomb was truly safe before moving it. Chen's first words to Sarah were an apology. He had been wrong to doubt her capabilities, and her unconventional approach had succeeded where military procedures might have failed. The device was indeed designed to exploit standard EOD techniques, and Sarah's civilian training had provided exactly the different perspective needed to defeat Vance's trap. The removal process took another 2 hours as the team carefully disassembled and documented every component of the device. Sarah worked alongside the military EOD specialists, sharing her analysis and helping them understand how each part of Vance's design had functioned. Her insights would be valuable for preparing defenses against similar devices in the future. Intelligence gathered from the disabled bomb led to the rapid location and neutralization of 3 other devices that Vance had placed around the region. Sarah's success had not only saved Fort Harrison but had also prevented a series of coordinated attacks that could have caused massive casualties and damage. Colonel Hayes personally thanked Sarah for her service and recommended her for a civilian commendation that recognized her extraordinary contribution to national security. More importantly for Sarah's career, Hayes also wrote a detailed report about the incident that would become required reading for EOD personnel throughout the military. The success at Fort Harrison changed Sarah's status within the explosive ordnance disposal community virtually overnight. Word of the civilian who had defused a military bomb in total darkness spread quickly through EOD units around the world. Sarah began receiving requests for consultation and training from military units that had previously been skeptical of civilian involvement in their field. Secure Tech Solutions promoted Sarah to senior analyst and gave her authority to participate directly in field operations. She was no longer restricted to providing support from a distance. She could now work hands-on with explosive devices under appropriate supervision. Thompson made it clear that Sarah had earned her place among the company's top EOD specialists. Sarah's success also attracted attention from federal law enforcement agencies. The FBI's bomb squad invited her to join their training program for dealing with domestic terrorism threats. The ATF offered her a consulting position that would involve analyzing explosive devices used in criminal investigations. Sarah found herself with more opportunities than she had ever imagined possible. Murphy was proud, but not surprised by Sarah's success. He had seen her dedication and natural talent during their training sessions, and he had always believed she would prove herself when given the opportunity. Sarah's achievement validated Murphy's decision to share his knowledge with someone outside the traditional military EOD community. The relationship between Sarah and the military EOD community evolved significantly after Fort Harrison. While some resistance remained, most military EOD specialists came to recognize that Sarah's different background and perspective could be valuable in certain situations. Several military commanders requested that Sarah be included in their teams for particularly challenging cases. Sarah's first assignment after Fort Harrison involved a suspicious device found at a civilian airport. The bomb showed similarities to Vance's design, suggesting that he might have shared his techniques with other criminals before his capture. Sarah's experience with Vance's methods made her the obvious choice to lead the analysis and disposal effort. The airport device proved to be less sophisticated than the bomb at Fort Harrison, but it still required Sarah's specialized knowledge to disable safely. Working with local law enforcement and airport security, Sarah was able to neutralize the threat without disrupting air traffic or endangering civilians. Her calm professionalism under pressure impressed everyone involved in the operation. Sarah's growing reputation led to invitations to speak at conferences and training seminars around the world. She shared her experiences and analytical techniques with EOD specialists, emphasizing the importance of thinking beyond conventional approaches when facing unconventional threats. Her presentations were always well received and often led to requests for additional consultation. The emotional impact of her success at Fort Harrison took time for Sarah to fully process. She had achieved her goal of proving herself in the EOD field, but the experience had also shown her the real consequences of the work she had chosen. Lives had depended on her decisions, and the weight of that responsibility was something she continued to wrestle with. Sarah's relationship with her family improved after Fort Harrison, as her parents finally understood that their daughter had found her calling in life. They were still concerned about the dangers of her work, but they could see that Sarah was fulfilled and making a meaningful contribution to public safety. Her success helped them accept her career choice. Thompson offered Sarah the opportunity to lead Secure Tech's new civilian EOD training program, which would prepare other non-military personnel for careers in explosive ordnance disposal. The program was designed to address the growing need for EOD expertise in civilian law enforcement and private security, areas where traditional military training might not be optimal. Sarah accepted the training program leadership role, but insisted on continuing her field work as well. She had worked too hard to reach operational status to give it up for a purely administrative position. The combination of teaching and field work appealed to her because it allowed her to share her knowledge while continuing to develop her practical skills. The training program attracted students from diverse backgrounds, including former military personnel seeking to transition to civilian EOD work, law enforcement officers specializing in bomb threats, and engineers interested in security applications. Sarah's own non-traditional background made her an effective teacher for students who didn't fit the conventional military profile. One of Sarah's most challenging cases after Fort Harrison involved a series of bombs placed in urban infrastructure by a terrorist group. The devices were smaller than military ordnance, but more sophisticated than typical criminal explosives. Sarah had to develop new techniques for working in confined spaces while dealing with devices designed to be triggered by standard detection methods. The urban infrastructure case required Sarah to work closely with city engineers and utility workers in addition to law enforcement and military personnel. Her ability to communicate technical information to non-specialists and to coordinate complex operations involving multiple agencies became as important as her bomb disposal skills. Sarah's success in the infrastructure case led to her appointment as a consultant to the Department of Homeland Security's Bomb Threat Response Team. The position involved developing protocols for civilian authorities dealing with explosive threats and training local law enforcement agencies in threat assessment and response procedures. Working with Homeland Security brought Sarah into contact with intelligence agencies and international security organizations. She participated in briefings about global terrorism threats and contributed to the development of countermeasures against new types of explosive devices. Her perspective as a civilian EOD specialist was valued in discussions about protecting civilian infrastructure. 5 years after Fort Harrison, Sarah had become one of the most respected figures in the explosive ordnance disposal community. Military units specifically requested her participation in complex operations, and her analytical techniques were taught in EOD schools around the world. She had proven that expertise and dedication could overcome traditional barriers and prejudices. Sarah never forgot the lesson of Fort Harrison, that different perspectives and unconventional approaches could be crucial for solving seemingly impossible problems. She continued to encourage other non-traditional candidates to pursue careers in EOD, believing that diversity of backgrounds and training methods strengthened the entire field. The military's attitude towards civilian EOD specialists changed significantly as a result of Sarah's success and the success of others who followed her path. While military training remained the standard for military operations, civilian specialists were increasingly recognized as valuable assets for certain types of threats and situations. Sarah's career continued to evolve as new types of explosive threats emerged and as technology changed the nature of bomb making and bomb disposal. She remained at the forefront of developing new techniques and training methods, always remembering the dark tunnel at Fort Harrison where she had first proven that determination and knowledge could overcome any obstacle. Looking back on that night, Sarah realized that defusing the bomb had been only the beginning of her real education in explosive ordnance disposal. The technical skills she had learned were important, but the confidence and credibility she had gained were equally valuable. She had shown herself and the world that she belonged in the most challenging and dangerous field she could have chosen. The phrase "no civilians allowed" was still heard occasionally in military EOD circles, but it was no longer an absolute rule. Sarah had changed that, not through arguments or politics, but by proving her worth when it mattered most. In the darkness of a tunnel beneath a military base, she had found her calling and opened doors for others to follow.